I've got $38.16, she said, her voice steady despite everything. And an ex-husband who just texted me he knows exactly where I am. I'm not asking for charity. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for work, whatever work nobody else here wants to do. I'll do it. All of it. Just tell me there's something. The man across from her didn't blink, didn't move, just looked at her the way a mountain looks at weather. If this story hit you somewhere, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this yard reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You don't want to miss what happens next. The sign above the gate read Iron Meridian Auto Salvage, and the letters were rusted just enough to make you wonder if the whole place might fall on you before you ever made it inside. Tessa Rowland didn't wonder about that. She was past wondering about things she couldn't control. She pushed through the chain-link gate with her shoulder because both her hands were full, her left holding a canvas bag that carried everything she still owned, her right gripping a phone with a cracked screen that had buzzed 4 times in the last 20 minutes with messages she had stopped opening. The yard was enormous. Rows of gutted cars stretched in every direction, stacked in some places 3 and 4 high, organized in a system that looked like chaos until you stood still long enough to start reading it. Oil smell, metal smell, the low grind of machinery somewhere deep in the back that never quite went quiet. A dog barked once from somewhere she couldn't see, then stopped. There were men everywhere. Not construction workers, not mechanics in the ordinary sense. These were men who looked like they'd been assembled from the same raw material as the machines they worked on, heavy, deliberate, marked up by years of weather and work and choices that didn't come with apologies. Several wore cuts, black leather vests with patches that Tessa had seen enough news coverage to recognize. Hell's Angels, the real kind, not the romanticized kind. She kept walking. A man near the front office door looked up from a clipboard and stared at her the way people stare at something that doesn't belong in the frame, not with hostility exactly, but with a flat bureaucratic confusion, like she was an error in a spreadsheet. "Help you," he said. "I need to speak to whoever runs this place," Tessa said. He looked her over once, not disrespectful, just thorough. "You lost? No. You a reporter? No. You got a vehicle being processed? No." He waited. She didn't elaborate. He tilted his head slightly and said, "Wait here," and went inside. Tessa waited. She didn't sit. Sitting felt like it would cost her something she needed to keep. She stood with her bag over her shoulder and her phone in her hand, and she watched the yard move around her, men carrying parts of forklift inching along a gravel path, 2 guys arguing over something near a crushed sedan with the calm expertise of people who'd been arguing about the same categories of things for 20 years. Nobody spoke to her. That was fine. She'd had years of being spoken at. Not being spoken to was a kind of peace she'd only recently learned to recognize. The man came back out. Behind him was someone else. Rafe Calder was 58 years old and built like a person who had never once in his life been in a hurry because he had never needed to be. He was maybe 6'2", wide across the shoulders in a way that wasn't performance, just accumulation. His face carried a scar that ran from his left jawline toward his ear, old, fully healed part of the architecture of him. His hair was gray short on the sides. His beard was trimmed close, also gray. He wore the cut the way other men wear skin. He looked at Tessa. She looked back. "You asked to see me," he said. It wasn't a question and it wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement the way a judge might acknowledge the presence of a new case file. "If you're the one who runs this place," "Yes," Tessa said. "Rafe Calder. I run it." He crossed his arms. Not aggressive, just settled. "You're not from around here." "I'm from Cincinnati originally. That doesn't matter." "What does matter?" Tessa took one breath. She'd rehearsed this. Not the words exactly, but the shape of it, the compression of it, because she knew she had maybe 90 seconds before he made up his mind about her, and she couldn't afford to waste a single one of those seconds on anything that wasn't the truth. "I have $38.16, she said. "A bag with a change of clothes, my documents, and a phone that's cracked but still works. I have an ex-husband who sent me a message 40 minutes ago telling me he knows what city I'm in. I have no job, no address, and I'm not going back to a shelter because the last one wasn't safe." She paused. "I need cash work. I'll do whatever nobody else here wants to do. Cleaning, filing data, Entry, hauling, scrap by hand, whatever the worst job in this yard is, I'll take it. Today. Right now. Rafe looked at her for a long moment. You know what this place is, he said. Yes. And you came here anyway. I ran out of better options around Tuesday. Something in his face shifted. Not softness, not sympathy. It was more like recalibration, the expression of a man who had been handed an unexpected variable and was now quietly running the math. You have any experience with clerical work, he said. 4 years as an office manager for a logistics company. 2 years before that doing inventory auditing for a distribution warehouse. I can read a filing system in about 15 minutes. I can rebuild one in a day. This ain't a logistics company, Rafe said. I can see that. Our records are, he stopped, chose the word carefully, behind. How far behind? Months, some of it longer. Tessa nodded. I can fix that. He studied her for another moment. Then he said, you understand there are rules here that aren't written anywhere. I understand that everywhere has rules that aren't written anywhere, Tessa said. I've been learning those my whole life. I picked them up fast. Rafe uncrossed his arms. He turned toward the office door and pushed it open without looking back at her. Come look at the office, he said. If you can walk in there without flinching, you've got a trial day. Cash at the end. If you last past noon, we'll talk about what comes next. Tessa followed him inside. Jerome. The office was a specific kind of disaster that Tessa recognized immediately. Not random chaos, but organized chaos that had been organized by someone who understood the work but had no infrastructure to support it. There were stacks of paper on every flat surface, filing cabinets with drawers that didn't fully close because they were overfull, a desktop computer that looked like it hadn't been updated since an earlier presidential administration, Post-it notes on the wall that served as a filing system that worked perfectly until it didn't, which was probably months ago. But the bones were there. That was what most people missed. They walked into rooms like this and saw the mess. Tessa walked in and saw the system underneath the mess, the logic that had once organized all of this before it got overwhelmed. You could always rebuild from bones. You just had to find them first. This is Denny, Rafe said. A man looked up from behind one of the stacks. He was maybe 45 with the look of a man who had been slowly defeated by his own filing system over the course of several years and had made peace with it in the way you make peace with a chronic injury. He blinked at Tessa. She's going to help get the record straight, Rafe said. Denny looked at Tessa, then at Rafe, then at Tessa again. Does she know about the he started? She knows enough, Rafe said. Show her where the intake logs are. Denny showed her. They were in 3 different places. None of them logical, 2 of them contradicting each other. Tessa didn't say anything, she just looked. She asked 2 questions. What was the intended flow when a vehicle came in, and who touched the paperwork between gate and lot? Denny answered both, she nodded. Then she chose the worst corner of the office, the one with the oldest stacks, the one that smelled faintly of motor oil and old coffee, the one where the overhead light was flickering at the frequency of a minor headache, and she set her bag down and started. So, by 9:30, 3 men had walked through the office, glanced at her, and left without speaking. By 10, one of them came back and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her sort intake receipts into chronological order. You actually know what you're doing, he said. It came out surprised, like he'd expected her to be pretending. Yes, Tessa said. What's your name? Tessa. He nodded slowly. His name, she'd learn later, was Garvey. He'd been with the club for 11 years and handled the yard's physical inventory, the actual vehicles, their conditions, their locations, and the lot. He and Denny had been working in parallel for years without much overlap. That was part of why the records were a mess. 2 people managing different halves of the same system without a bridge between them. Tessa was starting to see the bridge. She didn't say any of this. Not yet. She just sorted receipts and made notes in the margin of a yellow legal pad she'd found in the second desk drawer. Her phone buzzed out. She turned it face down without looking at it. Garvey noticed. His eyes went to the phone and back to her face. She kept working. Bad news, he said. Old news, Tessa said. He didn't push it. That was something she was starting to understand about this place nobody pushed. They watched. They assessed. But they didn't push. She wasn't sure yet if that was respect or indifference, But either way, it gave her room to breathe, and room to breathe was something she had not had in a very long time. Dina. By 11, she found the first real problem. Not the disorganization, that was surface. The first real problem was a set of intake logs from 8 months ago where the VIN records didn't match the lot placement records. Not by accident or not entirely by accident. Some of the discrepancies were clearly data entry errors, the kind that happen when someone is entering 15 vehicles a day on a system that isn't designed for it. But 3 of the entries looked different. The information had been entered in a way that was just slightly too consistent to be random error. Someone had moved vehicles through the intake process in a way that obscured their origin. Tessa stared at those 3 records for a long time. Then she made a separate notation on the back page of her legal pad, completely separate from everything else, and continued sorting. She was not going to bring that to anyone today. She was on a trial day. She had no standing, no trust built, no context for what those records might mean. It could be something, it could be nothing. It could be something that the people running this place already knew about and had a reason for that she wasn't in a position to understand yet. What she was not going to do was walk into a Hell's Angels scrapyard on her first morning and wave a flag about something she half understood. She kept working. At noon, Rafe came back into the office. He stood and looked at what she'd done to the corner. The stacks were gone. In their place were organized groups separated by month, then by intake type, then flagged where information was incomplete. Her legal pad had 4 pages of notes. The filing cabinet drawer that had been stuck halfway open was now fully closed. He looked at it for a long time. "You eat lunch," he said. "I'm fine." "That wasn't what I asked." Tessa looked up. "I had something this morning." Rafe turned toward the door. "Denny," he said without raising his voice. Denny appeared in the doorway. "Yeah. Get her something from the back. Whatever's there." Denny disappeared. Rafe didn't leave. He walked over to the corner she'd been working in and looked at the organized stacks, then at her legal pad. "Can I?" he said, gesturing at the pad. She handed it to him. He read through her notes, not quickly. He read the way a man reads something that matters thoroughly without performing his reaction. When he got to the 3rd page, something in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He kept reading. He finished. He handed it back. "You found something," he said. "I found some inconsistencies in a set of records from about 8 months ago," she said carefully. "I don't know what they mean. I don't have enough context." "But you flagged them." "On the back page, separately, not part of the main sort." He looked at her. "Why separately?" "Because I've been here 3 hours, Tessa said. "I'm not in a position to draw conclusions." Rafe was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Most people who spot something like that either ignore it or make it into a bigger deal than it is. Most people aren't trying to figure out whether they've still got a job at the end of the day," Tessa said. Something moved through his expression, not quite a smile, but in the same territory. "Fair point," he said. Denny came back with a deli sandwich on a paper plate and a bottle of water. He set it on the edge of the cleared desk space. "Thank you," Tessa said. "Don't thank me, Annie," Denny said. "I didn't buy it. It was Garvey's lunch." "Then thank Garvey for me." Denny looked like that was the most unexpected sentence he had heard in weeks. He retreated back toward his desk. Rafe moved toward the door. "You'll get cash at the end of the day," he said. "Come back tomorrow. We'll talk rates." Tessa nodded. She waited until he was fully out of the doorway. Then she let out a breath she'd been holding since approximately 8:45 that morning. She picked up the sandwich, put it down, picked up her phone. 3 more messages from Preston. She read the first one. "You can't keep running. I have your mother's address. I have your sister's workplace. Come home, and this ends quietly." She put the phone down. Her hands were steady. She didn't know when she'd learned how to make her hands stay steady when the rest of her was anything but. Sometime in the last 2 years. Sometime in the long education of understanding that the man she'd married wasn't going to change, wasn't going to stop, and wasn't going to let her go without a fight, she'd have to be smarter than him to win. She picked up her sandwich and her legal pad and went back to work. By 2 in the afternoon, she'd reconstructed the intake log structure, going back 14 months, and had written a proposed reorganization system on 6 pages of yellow legal pad, a clear intake flow, a cross-reference system between Denny's paperwork and Garvey's physical lot records, a flagging protocol for incomplete VNs, and a simple color-coded monthly audit trail that even someone doing the job for the first time could follow. Garvey found her at the filing cabinet. "You're still here," he said. "Told you I would be." He leaned against the door frame. He was younger than Rafe, somewhere in his early 40s, with the kind of permanent squint that comes from years of working outdoors without remembering sunglasses. "Rafe said you are coming back tomorrow." "That's the plan." "You know what this place is," he said. It was almost exactly what Rafe had said to her that morning. She wondered if it was a test they'd run on her separately or just a shared instinct. "A scrapyard," she said. "More than that." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Then where are you staying tonight?" Tessa paused just slightly, long enough that he caught it. "I'm figuring that out," she said. Garvey nodded slowly. "There's a motel on Route 9. Marta runs it. You tell her Garvey sent you, she'll give you a room for 40 a night, no questions, and she keeps her mouth shut." Tessa looked at him. "You've got a situation," Garvey said simply, like he was reading an inventory. "You're not the first person who came through that gate with one. We're not a charity, but we're not blind either." "I have $38, Tessa said. "You've got cash coming at the end of the day," he said. "Talk to Rafe before you leave. Tell him you need an advance against tomorrow." "I just started today." "He'll give it," Garvey said. "He gave it to me when I started. He's not soft, but he's not—" He paused, searching. "He's not unfair." Tessa held the man's gaze. She had learned in the past 2 years to be very careful about accepting help. Preston had used help as a leash. Help always came with a cost that wasn't stated up front. But this felt different. This felt like someone handing her a tool because they'd seen her working and figured she could use it, not because they expected anything in return. Not because it came with terms. She hoped she was reading that right. "Thank you," she said. Garvey shrugged. "Don't thank me. Just don't let the records get like this again." He pushed off the door frame and walked back out into the yard. Tessa turned back to the filing cabinet. Outside, the machinery ground on. Somewhere deep in the rows of compressed metal and ruined cars, men were working, pulling, sorting, cutting, carrying. Her phone buzzed again. She kept her eyes on the filing cabinet. She kept filing. At 4:30, she went looking for Rafe. She found him near the back of the yard talking to 2 men she didn't know over a vehicle that had just been brought in on a flatbed, a black pickup badly damaged on the driver's side with the kind of crumple that told a specific story about physics and velocity and whoever had been unlucky enough to be inside it. She waited until there was a pause in the conversation. "I need to ask you something," she said. Rafe looked at her. The 2 other men looked at her. She felt that looking, but she didn't acknowledge it. "Could I get an advance on tomorrow against today's pay? I have a place to be tonight, but I need a little more than I'll have otherwise." One of the other men made a sound, not quite a laugh. Rafe looked at him once. The sound stopped. "How much do you need?" Rafe said. $60 would get me through until tomorrow." He reached into his jacket, pulled out his wallet, counted out 3 20s and held them out to her. She took them. "Thank you," she said. "Don't make me regret it," he said. "Not cold, just direct." "I won't." She walked back toward the office to get her bag. As she was leaving, she passed Denny, who was locking the office door. "You did good today," he said. "I did my job," she said. "Around here," Denny said, "that's the same thing." She walked out through the gate at 5 o'clock with $83, a legal pad full of notes, a cracked phone with 7 unread messages from a man who thought her fear of him was permanent, and a key card for a motel room on Route 9 that cost $40 a night and asked no questions. She was not safe. She knew that. Preston's text was not a bluff. He didn't bluff. He was deliberate and patient, and he had resources she didn't, and sooner or later that equation was going to arrive at a door she was standing behind. But tonight she had a door to stand behind, and tomorrow morning she had a place to be. She walked to the bus stop and stood in the early evening light and waited, and for the first time in 11 days, she didn't feel like she was disappearing. She was back at 7:45 the next morning. Not because Rafe had told her what time to arrive. He hadn't. He'd said, "Come back tomorrow," and she'd taken that to mean before the day got away from her, before anyone could look up and decide the previous day had been an experiment that didn't need repeating. She'd learned that about second chances. They had a very short window before they close on their own. Denny was already there unlocking the office door with the practiced slowness of a man who had done this same sequence so many times his hands did it without instruction. He looked at her, looked at his watch, looked at her again. "You're early," he said. "Is that a problem?" He considered it. "No," he said, and held the door open. She went straight to the corner she'd cleared the day before. The organized stacks were exactly where she'd left them. Nobody had touched them. She didn't know if that was respect or simply because nobody else came near the corner. But either way, it meant her work was intact and she could pick up exactly where she'd stopped. She sat down, opened her legal pad to a fresh page, and started where the previous day's sorting had left off. By 8:15, Garvey walked through. He glanced at her, gave the smallest nod, the kind that means I see you and I'm not surprised, and went out to the yard. By 8:30, two men she hadn't seen before came in to pull intake forms from the cabinet. They both stopped when they saw the cabinet. One of them pulled open the drawer that had previously been stuck. It slid open cleanly. He stared at it like it had performed a magic trick. "Denny," he called out, "did you fix the drawer?" "Not me," Denny said from behind his stack. The man looked at Tessa. "I reorganized the load distribution," she said. "It was overpacked on one side. Should stay open now." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he found his forms faster than he expected she could tell by the slight surprise in his movement, and left. That was the thing about working in systems nobody else wanted to touch. People noticed the results before they noticed you. That was fine. Results were more durable than impressions. Her phone buzzed at 8:40. She didn't turn it over. She'd read all 7 messages last night at the motel, sitting on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on, because she'd learned that it was better to read them all at once than to let them accumulate like a pressure she hadn't checked. Preston's messages had a rhythm she knew well by now. The first 2 were factual, stating what he knew about her location and movements. The next 2 were appeals, the version of him that presented itself as reasonable and wounded. The final 3 were the real ones, short, specific, the kind of sentences that didn't need to be long because their meaning was already fully loaded. She had read them all. She had not responded to any of them. Then she had charged her phone, set her alarm, and slept 5 hours, which was more than she'd slept in any single stretch in the past 2 weeks. Now she turned her phone face down and kept working. The intake log reconstruction was more complicated than she'd initially mapped. What she'd thought was a 14-month gap was actually layered. There were 2 different systems that had been running simultaneously for about 6 months before one of them was abandoned, and nobody had reconciled them when the switch happened. So there were records in the old system that had no corresponding entries in the new one, and records in the new system that referenced vehicle IDs that only existed in the old one. She drew the structure on a fresh page. Not a diagram exactly. She wasn't building a flowchart. She was mapping the logic the way you'd map a conversation, showing where information went when it was entered and what happened to it at each stage, where the handoffs were, where they broke down. "What is that?" She looked up. Rafe was standing 2 feet away. She hadn't heard him come in. "The intake system has 2 parallel tracks that were never reconciled," she said. "When someone switched from the old process to the new one, they didn't transfer the open records. So there are vehicles in the lot that the current system doesn't fully account for because their primary record is in a format that nobody's been using for 7 months. Rafe looked at her page. "How many vehicles?" "I've found 17 so far. There may be more." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a problem." "It's a fixable problem," she said. "I need about 2 days to reconcile them completely. I'll need Garvey to physically verify the lot numbers against my list so I can close out the records correctly." Rafe looked at the page for another long moment. His expression was the same as it had been the day before, not impressed exactly, but recalibrated, like he was continuously revising an estimate. "I'll tell him," he said, and left. She went back to work. At 10:30, a man named Vic came into the office and sat down uninvited in the chair across from her cleared workspace. He was big, older than Garvey, with a beard that had gone completely white and the kind of stillness that wasn't calm so much as deeply accumulated patience. He watched her work for about 30 seconds. "You're Tessa," he said. "Yes." "Rafe says you're good with numbers." "I'm good with systems," she said. "Numbers are part of that." "What's the difference?" She looked up. It was a genuine question, she could tell, not a challenge. "Numbers are data. Systems are the logic that decides what the numbers mean. You can have perfect numbers in a broken system and still end up with garbage output." Vic considered that. That's how Denny explains it when the lot inventory doesn't match the books. Denny's not wrong. The lot inventory and the books have been running on different assumptions for at least 7 months. Neither one is lying. They're just speaking different languages. Vic folded his hands. He had the kind of hands that had done serious physical work for decades, scarred thick-knuckled, but precise in how he held them. And you can make them speak the same one. That's the win, Tessa said. He nodded slowly. Where'd you learn all this? A logistics company in Columbus, then a distribution warehouse, then 4 years of watching my ex-husband run a real estate operation and understanding that the difference between legal and illegal in that world was almost entirely in the quality of the paperwork. The sentence came out before she'd fully decided to say it. She didn't take it back. It was true, and in a place like this, she'd already understood that precision about certain things bought more trust than vagueness. Vic's eyes sharpened slightly. He was dirty. He was careful, she said, which is different. He never did anything that couldn't be explained. Everything had a document. Every document had a story. The story was usually almost true. She paused. That's how I learned to read records the way I do. I spent 3 years watching a man construct paper reality, and then I spent 1 year figuring out how to see through it. Vic was quiet. Then he said, "Does Rafe know that?" "He knows I was in a logistics company and a warehouse. He doesn't know the rest." "You planning to tell him?" Tessa looked at Vic directly. "When it becomes relevant," she said. "Today, my job is reconciling the intake logs. That's what I'm focused on." Vic looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, straightened his cut, and said, "Fair enough." He walked out. She exhaled slowly and turned back to her work. That had gone either very well or very badly, and she wouldn't know which for a while. Cheetah. Garvey came in at 11 with a clipboard and the slightly reluctant expression of a man who had been told to do something administrative in the middle of a physical workday. "Rafe says you need lot verification," he said. "I have 17 vehicle IDs that need physical confirmation," she said. She handed him the list clean organized with the lot zone codes she'd inferred from the old system's notation. "These are where I think they should be based on the original intake coordinates. If I got the translation right, you should be able to walk straight to them." Garvey looked at the list. "You figured out the old coordinate system. It took about 40 minutes. It's not complicated, it's just different. Whoever designed it was thinking in terms of the physical lot layout rather than a numerical grid. Once you understand their spatial logic, it's actually more intuitive than the current system." Garvey stared at the list. Then he looked at her. "I designed the old system," he said. Tessa felt the specific cold clarity of having said exactly the wrong thing to exactly the wrong person. Then Garvey said, "Huh," and kept looking at the list, and his expression wasn't offense. It was something closer to the look of a man who had been told his handwriting was legible by someone who'd managed to read a letter he'd given up on. Nobody ever figured it out before. Denny just called it chaos and gave up. "It's not chaos," Tessa said carefully. "It's just undocumented logic." Garvey folded the list and put it in his jacket pocket. "I'll go check these," he said. "Give me 2 hours." He left. Tessa pressed her palms flat on the desk for a moment and breathed. Good. That had gone good. She picked up her pen. At 12:50, Garvey came back. He dropped the list on the desk. Every vehicle ID had a check mark next to it. At the bottom in his handwriting, all present. Your zone codes were right on 15 of 17. The other 2 got moved last spring, new locations added at bottom. She looked at the 2 additions, transferred the information to her reconciliation sheet. That was it. 17 vehicles now fully accounted for in the current system, no longer ghosts in a dead database. "Thank you," she said. Garvey shrugged. "You did the hard part." He started to leave, then stopped. "There's lunch in the back. Actual lunch today, not just Garvey's sandwich." He said his own name with the flat irony of a man who had accepted the joke. Rafe had someone bring food. For everyone. For the office crew. Your office crew. He left. She sat with that for a moment. Office crew. Not a guest, not a test case, a category. She went and got lunch. Fun. The afternoon shifted the energy of the place in a way she hadn't expected. Word had gotten around, she understood that without needing anyone to explain it. This was a small operation by head count, whatever its reputation. 30-some people working a yard this size knew each other's business completely the way any small workplace does, And what she'd done in a day and a half had apparently passed through whatever communication system these men ran on. Two more guys stopped by the office on manufactured pretexts. One needed a form he could have gotten from Denny. One asked a question about a vehicle record that he clearly already knew the answer to. Both of them spent the actual time looking at what she'd done to the office. Not hostile. Assessing. She answered their questions, directly gave them what they needed, and went back to work each time without making a production of it. At 3:15, Denny came and stood next to her and said quietly so only she could hear it, "They're trying to figure out if you're for real." "I know," she said. "Rafe's the one who decides, but they all have a vote." "How does the vote work?" Denny thought about it. "If someone objects, they say so, to Rafe directly." "Has anyone objected?" Denny was quiet for a moment. "Not yet," he said, which was a specific kind of answer. She kept working. At 4, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, the voicemail indicator appeared. She didn't play it. At 4:40, the number called again. This time, something in her gut said, "Pick it up," the same instinct that had once told her to check the mail before Preston got home and had found the notice that changed everything. She stepped out of the office and answered. "Is this Tessa Rowland?" A woman's voice. Professional. Controlled. "Who's asking?" "My name is Caroline Marsh. I'm an attorney in family law and civil protection orders. I'm calling because I was given your number by a mutual acquaintance who thought you might need some information about your current legal situation." Tessa's grip on the phone tightened. "What mutual acquaintance?" "I'm not at liberty to say, but I can tell you that your ex-husband, filed a motion this morning in Franklin County to compel your return under a financial dependency claim. It's not likely to succeed, but it will generate a court date, and if you don't respond within 14 days, a default judgment could create a legal obligation that's much harder to unwind later." The yard went quiet around Tessa, or seemed to the way the world goes quiet when a piece of information lands with enough weight. "He can do that," she said. "File a motion claiming I'm financially dependent on him. We've been separated for 8 months. He's claiming the separation was not legally formalized and that you have been operating under a verbal financial arrangement that constitutes ongoing dependency. It's a stretch, but stretches cost money and time to fight, and he knows that." Tessa pressed her back against the outside wall of the office. The metal was warm from the afternoon sun. She focused on that warmth. Physical. Real. "What do I need to do?" she said. "You need to file a formal response through the court. I can help you do that, at no charge given the circumstances." A pause. "There are organizations that handle situations like yours. I work with several of them. If you're willing to share your current location generally, I can make sure the right resources reach you." "How do I know you're who you say you are?" "You don't," Caroline Marsh said, "but I can give you the number for the Franklin County court clerk, and you can call them directly and verify the motion was filed this morning. That part at least is checkable." Tessa wrote the clerk's number on the back of her hand in ballpoint pen. She thanked the woman without committing to anything and ended the call. She stood outside the office for a moment with the late afternoon light on her and the sound of the yard behind her. Preston had filed a legal motion this morning while she was reconciling intake logs. He wasn't going to wait for her to get stable. He was going to use the law, the same system she'd watched him navigate and manipulate for years to drag her back before she had ground under her feet. She went back inside. Rafe was at Denny's desk looking at something on the computer. He looked up when she came in. Something in her face must have changed because he straightened slightly. "Problem," he said. Tessa sat down. She picked up her pen, then she put it back down. "My ex-husband filed a legal motion this morning," she said. "A financial dependency claim. I have 14 days to respond before a default judgment." The office went very quiet. Denny's typing stopped. "He can do that," Denny said. "He's doing it," Tessa said. "He's done more complicated things for less reason." Rafe looked at her steadily. "You have a lawyer." "I have a name. A woman who called me just now says she works with protection case organizations, says she'll help me file a response for free. I don't know if she's legitimate." "Give me the name," Rafe said. She did. Rafe took out his phone and made a call. A short 1:30 seconds at the outside. Then he ended it and said, "She's real. Uses her for club business sometimes. She's not cheap, but she's solid." Tessa looked at him. "You know her?" "Know of her," he said. He held her gaze. Call her back. Tell her you're ready to file. I can do that on my own time, Tessa said. I've still got 40 minutes in the workday. Something shifted in Rafe's face. Not emotion exactly, more like the quiet acknowledgement of a fact he hadn't expected to encounter. You can make the call from here, he said. She picked up her phone. She called Carolyn Marsh back. She made an appointment for the following morning, 7 a.m. before she needed to be at the yard. She confirmed her address as the Route 9 motel. She wrote down 3 things she needed to gather before the appointment. When she hung up, the office felt different. She couldn't have named the exact quality of the difference. But something had shifted in the air the way pressure shifts before weather. Denny was looking at his screen again, but he wasn't typing. Rafe had gone to the doorway. Tessa, he said. She looked up. The 3 records you flagged on day 1, he said. The inconsistent intake entries from 8 months ago. He paused. I know what they are. I'll tell you when it becomes relevant. He was giving her her own words back to her. She held his gaze. Understood, she said. He left. She turned back to her desk, and for the first time since she'd walked through the gate of Iron Meridian, she felt something she didn't entirely trust. Yet not safety, not security, but the particular sensation of ground that might if she tested it carefully enough. Hold her wait. She picked up her pen. 40 minutes left in the workday. She worked every one of them. Caroline Marsh's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and photocopier toner, and she was already behind her desk when Tess arrived at 6:58, 2 minutes early, with a folder of documents she'd organized the night before by category and date. Carolyn looked at the folder, then at Tessa, then back at the folder. You brought everything already, she said. You gave me a list, Tessa said. I follow lists. Caroline was in her mid-40s with the kind of face that had stopped performing warmth for strangers sometime around her 3rd year of family law practice and replaced it with something more useful. Directness, precision, the specific competence of someone who had seen every version of the situation and knew exactly which tools fit which problem. She took the folder and went through it without speaking. Tessa sat across from her and waited. This is organized, Caroline said, not quite a compliment, more like a notation. The separation date is documented in 3 places, Tessa said. The lease I signed in my name only in January, the bank account I opened in February, and the certified letter I sent him in March, formally stating my intent not to return. The verbal financial arrangement he's claiming never existed. Every account we shared I closed or removed myself from. I have the confirmation numbers. Caroline set the folder down and looked at Tessa directly. He knows this paperwork exists. Yes. So the motion isn't about winning, it's about the 14 days. He wants me to run out of time or run out of money fighting him or surface in a court record where he can find my location. Tessa's voice stayed level. He's done this before. Not to me, to a woman he dated before we married. She told me about it after the wedding. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. Caroline was quiet for a moment. You understood eventually. Eventually, Tessa said. They spent the next 45 minutes building the response. Caroline drafted, Tessa corrected details, Caroline refined. By 7:50, they had a document that was clean, precise, and left no gap Preston could work a finger into. Caroline would file it electronically before noon. The motion would be answered before Preston had time to use the 14-day window as leverage. Walking out of the building at 8:05, Tessa felt something sharpen in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but the specific clarity of having closed one door before someone could push through it. She got to Iron Meridian by 8:20. Rafe was at the gate when she'd arrived, talking to a man in a county vehicle. Not an argument, not yet, but the quality of the conversation had the particular tension of 2 people being very careful with their words, because they both understood the words could escalate. Tessa walked past without stopping. She went inside, set down her bag, and opened her legal pad. At 8:40, Rafe came through the door and said, County inspector's here. Says he has a compliance review scheduled. Denny looked up. We don't have a compliance review scheduled. He says we do. Tessa kept her pen moving. What's his name? She said. Dorian Klein. She wrote it on the corner of her page. Does he have paperwork showing the review was scheduled? He's got a form. Can I see it? Rafe looked at her for a half second. Then he went out and came back 2 minutes later with a single sheet of county compliance review notice, with a date stamp from 11 days ago. Tessa looked at it. She looked at it for 60 seconds without speaking, which was long enough that Rafe said, "What?" "This review was triggered by a complaint," she said. "There's a complaint reference number in the header. County compliance reviews don't happen on a schedule they're complaint triggered. Someone filed a complaint about Iron Meridian 11 days ago." Who? Who? The form won't say, but the complaint number format tells me which division processed it. This is environmental and zoning, not safety. Someone complained about records compliance, not physical safety. Denny said slowly. Somebody pointed him at the paperwork. Someone pointed him at the specific problem we've been fixing for 3 days, Tessa said. The office went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something clicks into place that everyone was hoping wouldn't. Rafe said, "Klein's outside." "I know." Tessa stood up. She picked up her legal pad. "Tell him we'll meet him in the office." Rafe looked at her. "You want to handle this?" It wasn't quite a question. "I've been rebuilding these records for 3 days, she said. "I know them better than anyone in this building right now." "Yes, I want to handle it." Another half-second pause. Then, "All right." Dorian Klein was the kind of official who had learned to weaponize the appearance of procedure. He was maybe 50, with the careful grooming of someone who understood that authority was partly costuming, and he carried a leather portfolio that was just slightly too expensive for a county inspector's salary. He sat down across from Tessa like a man who had already decided the outcome of a meeting before it started. "Ms." He checked his form. "Roland, you're the records clerk." "Records and intake manager," Tessa said. He wrote something. "How long have you been in this position?" 3 days. He looked up. His expression did something complicated, recalibrating the way Rafe's had, but for entirely different reasons. 3 days. "Yes. And you're representing the yard's records compliance." "I'm the person who knows these records," Tessa said. "That makes me the right person to discuss them." Klein opened his portfolio. He had a printed list violations formatted with the flat confidence of a document that expected not to be challenged. He went through them in order, reading each one with the practiced cadence of someone who'd done this often enough that the reading itself was a form of pressure. Tessa listened to the first 3 without interrupting. On the 4th one, she said, "That VIN classification is wrong." Klein stopped reading. "Excuse me. The vehicle you're citing as improperly classified, permit number ending in 471, was classified under the pre-2019 county code. The county updated its vehicle classification standards in March 2019 and grandfathered all existing intake records that predated the update. That vehicle was processed in November 2018. The classification is compliant under the code that was active at the time of intake." Klein looked at his form, then at her. "The current standard doesn't apply retroactively to pre-update intakes. That's in the update notice itself, Section 4, Paragraph 2. She turned to a page in her legal pad. "I can read it to you if that's helpful." He didn't respond to that. He moved to the next item on his list. Tessa let him read it. "The renewal certification for the lot operating permit," he said. "Our records show it lapsed in." "It was renewed electronically in August," Tessa said. "The electronic renewal generates a confirmation number, not a paper certificate. The previous office manager didn't print the certificate, so there's no physical copy in the file. But the renewal is on record in the county system. If you pull permit number," she checked her pad, "IE 7734M, you'll find the renewal timestamp in the confirmation code." Klein's pen had stopped moving. Garvey was standing in the doorway. Tessa hadn't seen him come in. He was watching the exchange the way you watch something unexpected. Very still, very focused. Klein looked up from his portfolio. "The scrap intake forms for the 3rd and 4th quarter of last year show inconsistencies in them. Those inconsistencies are an artifact of a system transition," Tessa said. "The yard was running 2 parallel intake systems during that period, and the records weren't reconciled when the old system was decommissioned. The underlying data is complete and accurate. What looks like inconsistency is a formatting difference between the 2 systems. I've been reconciling those records this week. I can show you the reconciliation log if you want to see how the numbers align." She turned her legal pad around and slid it across the desk. Klein looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. The room had changed. Tessa felt it without looking up from her pad. The quality of the silence had shifted from the silence of an intimidating proceeding to something else. Something closer to the silence of a room watching a reversal. Rafe was leaning against the wall near the door. She couldn't see his face from where she was sitting, but she could see the set of his shoulders. Klein picked up her legal pad and read. A minute passed, then another. He set it down. The missing weight certification for lot. It's not missing, Tessa said. It's misfiled. It's in the physical intake folder for that vehicle, not the compliance folder, because whoever processed it at the time put it with the vehicle documentation instead of the regulatory documentation. That's a filing error. The certification exists. She stood up, went to the reorganized filing cabinet, and pulled a folder. Opened it, found the certification in 40 seconds, put it on the desk in front of Klein. He picked it up, looked at it, put it down. His portfolio was still open. There were more items on his list. Tessa could see the edge of the paper could count approximately 8 more lines. But Klein wasn't looking at the list anymore. He was looking at her. You've been here 3 days, he said. Yes. And you know all of this. I've been working 12-hour days, Tessa said. And the records once reconciled aren't complicated. They're just disorganized. There's a difference. Klein closed his portfolio. The sound of it closing was very loud in the quiet room. He looked at Rafe. I'll need to review the reconciliation documentation fully before I can close out the complaint. You can review it here, Rafe said. His voice was completely even. Right now, everything's available. Klein looked around the office, at the organized filing cabinets, at the cleared desk spaces, at Tessa standing next to the cabinet with a folder in her hands and a legal pad in front of her that had just dismantled every item on his list. I'll need to confer with my office, he said. Of course, Tessa said. She took a business card from the corner of her desk, Denny's card which she'd borrowed because she didn't have one yet, and wrote her name and the office number on the back. Please have them call directly. I can provide any additional documentation they need. Klein took the card. He looked at it. He looked at Tessa. Then he stood, collected his portfolio, and walked out of the office without another word. The sound of his footsteps on the gravel faded. Nobody spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then Garvey from the doorway said, He's going to his car. Is he on the phone? Rafe said. Yeah. Is he writing anything down? Not anymore, Garvey said. There was something in his voice, flat, precise, the tone of a man reporting a fact that he found unexpectedly satisfying. Rafe looked at Tessa. She was already sitting back down. She pulled her legal pad back toward her and turned to a fresh page. I need to document everything that just happened, she said. Date, time, each item he raised, and the specific record that answered it. If he comes back with a formal finding that we need a contemporaneous record of this meeting. Rafe was still looking at her. Rafe, she said without looking up, I need about 20 minutes to write this up while it's fresh. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Denny, get her whatever she needs. And he walked out. Denny brought her coffee without being asked. He set it down carefully like he was placing something fragile near something important, and then went back to his own desk and started typing. Tessa wrote for 20 minutes, every item Klein had raised, every record she'd cited, every document she'd produced, the exact sequence, the exact wording as close as she could reconstruct it. When she finished, she read it through once and initialed the bottom. Then she sat back. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't let herself notice while Klein was in the room. She'd locked that down completely, the way she'd learned to lock things down, the same mechanism that kept her voice level when Preston sent his messages, the same one that had gotten her across a parking lot and onto a bus and through 4 states without falling apart. But now, in the 20 minutes of quiet after her hands were doing what they'd been waiting to do, she pressed them flat on the desk. You okay? Denny said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his screen. But he'd asked. Yes, she said. A pause. You were something in there, Denny said, still not looking at her. I just knew the records, she said. Nobody just knows records like that after 3 days. A beat. Klein knew it too. That's why he stopped talking. Tessa picked up her coffee. It was hot and bad, and exactly what she needed. He was never really about the records, she said. He was about pressure. The records were just the shape the pressure came in. Denny stopped typing. Someone sent him here. Yes. Someone who knew about the backlog. Someone who knew about it and knew when to time it, Tessa said. 11 days ago, someone filed that complaint. 11 days ago, I hadn't started here yet. Whoever filed it expected to find a yard with disorganized records and no one capable of defending them. Denny turned his chair toward her. But you were here. I was here, Tessa said. The door opened. Rafe came back in and behind him. This was new. This was different, came Vic and two other men she'd seen in the yard, but not yet learned the names of. The office felt smaller suddenly, not threateningly, but with the specific weight of a group that had gathered because something required gathering. Rafe looked at her documentation on the desk. Can I read that? She handed it to him. He read it, passed it to Vic. Vic read it, passed it along. When it came back to her, Rafe said, Klein called his office from the parking lot. Garvey heard part of it. Klein told him the complaint might not hold. It won't hold, Tessa said. Every item he raised has a document behind it. He knows that now. He said something else, Rafe said. He said the complaint was filed by a private party, not another agency. Someone paid the filing fee and submitted a formal complaint. Private party. Tessa absorbed that. The complaint required specific knowledge of our records backlog, Rafe said. He was watching her, specific enough to know which compliance categories to cite. Someone with access to your records, Tessa said, or someone who was told what to look for. The room was very quiet. Tessa thought about the 3 flagged records from 8 months ago, the intake entries that had looked too consistent to be random error. She thought about Rafe saying, I know what they are. I'll tell you when it's relevant. She thought about Klein arriving 2 days after she'd started reconciling exactly those records. Rafe, she said, the 3 entries I flagged on day 1. He met her eyes. Yeah. Are they connected to the complaint? He was quiet for a long moment. The room waited. Even the machinery outside seemed to pause. Not directly, he said, but the person who knows about them is connected to the person who filed it. Tessa kept her voice even. Is that person going to be a problem? Rafe held her gaze. He already is, he said. She picked up her pen. She turned to the next clean page of her legal pad. Then we document everything from this point forward, she said. Every vehicle, every intake, every date, every signature. If someone is trying to use the records against this yard, the answer is better records. Records they can't twist. Nobody in the room said anything. Then Vic said quietly, she's right. Rafe looked at Tessa for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the desk. A key, not the small one from before. This one was larger with a tag attached. Office storage room, he said. Everything we've got going back 4 years. You're going to want to start with the oldest files. She looked at the key, then at him. I'll start tonight, she said. Rafe nodded once. He turned and walked out. The other men followed. Vic was last. At the door, he paused. Klein won't come back with a finding, Vic said. He knows he lost, but whoever sent him, they'll know it too. He looked at her steadily. Be ready for the next thing. He left. Tessa picked up the key, held it in her palm. Outside the yard was already moving again, the sounds of metal and machinery and men working, filling the air the way water fills a space completely without ceremony. She put the key in her pocket. She turned to a fresh page. She started writing. The next thing was coming. She was going to be ready for it. She worked through the storage room for 3 evenings straight. Rafe had given her access and then left her alone with it, which was exactly the right call. The room held 4 years of physical records intake forms, title transfers, lot certifications, vendor contracts, insurance renewals, tax filings, and whoever had maintained them before had done so with the same logic Garvey had used for the lot system: functional, spatial, deeply personal, and completely undocumented. Once Tessa understood the pattern, and it took her most of the first evening, the rest moved fast. She built a master index on a yellow legal pad that grew to 31 pages over 3 nights. Every document category, every date range, every cross-reference that connected a physical record in the storage room to an entry in the active system she'd been rebuilding at the main desk. By Thursday evening, she had a picture of Iron Meridian's paperwork history that was more complete than anything the yard had ever had. She also had something else. On the second evening, buried in a folder from 11 months ago, she found a vendor contract for scrap metal processing. Routine on its surface, But the vendor name didn't match any of the intake records she'd reconciled. The metal processed under that contract had come in under 3 different vehicle IDs, the same 3 she'd flagged on day 1, the same ones Rafe had told her he knew about. She put the contract in a separate folder. She put the folder in her bag. She didn't tell anyone yet. She was learning that in this place, like in most places that operated on trust, built over years, information had to be offered at the right moment, or it became something other than help. She went back to the motel at 10:30 and lay on the bed with the folder on the nightstand and thought about what she knew and what she didn't. And she was still thinking when her phone buzzed at 11:15. Not Preston's number, not Caroline Marsh, a local number she didn't recognize. She answered, "I know you found the Kelvin contract." A man's voice, low, careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed the sentence enough times that the rehearsal showed. "You need to understand that what you found is not what you think it is." Tessa sat up. "Who is this?" "Someone who worked at that yard before you. Someone who put those records where they are for a reason." "What reason?" A pause. "Protection. Those 3 vehicles were processed through Kelvin because keeping them in the standard system would have connected them to people who would have created problems for the yard. The contract was a buffer." "A buffer," Tessa said. "Yes." "Whose problems?" Another pause. Longer this time. "The kind that don't stay in courtrooms." Tessa looked at the folder on the nightstand. "Why are you calling me?" "Because you're about to put those records back into the standard system as part of your reconciliation. If you do that, the buffer disappears, and the people those vehicles are connected to will notice." "Are you threatening me?" "No," he said, and the quickness of it was its own kind of answer. "I'm warning you, there's a difference." "Who filed the county complaint?" Tessa said. Silence. "The complaint that sent Klein here," she said. "Who filed it?" The line went dead. She sat in the motel room with the dead phone and the folder on the nightstand for a long time. Then she opened the folder again and looked at the Kelvin contract and thought about buffers and what they protect and who builds them and why. She put the folder back in her bag. She set her alarm. She did not sleep well. In the morning, she told Rafe. Not everything, not the phone call, not yet. She told him she'd found the Kelvin contract and what it connected to, and that she needed him to explain it before she could decide how to handle it in the reconciliation. They were standing outside the office, away from the doorway in the early morning before most of the yard crew had arrived. Rafe listened to her without interrupting, which was how he always listened, with the total weighted attention of someone who understood that interrupting cost you information. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Sit on those 3 records for now," he said. "For how long?" "Until I tell you otherwise." She held his gaze. "Rafe, someone called me last night. Someone who knew I'd found the contract." His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind it. Not surprise exactly, but the specific alertness of a man who has just received a piece of information that connects to other pieces he's been holding separately. "What did they say?" he said. She told him all of it. When she finished, he looked out at the yard for a moment. Then he said, "You should have told me last night." "I needed to think first," she said. "You're not in a position where thinking alone is safe anymore," he said. It wasn't a reprimand. It was a fact stated the way he stated facts, directly without cushioning. Tessa absorbed it. "I understand," she said. "If someone has your number and knows what you're working on inside this office, then the situation has moved." He looked at her. "Where do you think the call came from?" "Someone who knew I'd find the contract. Either they've been watching the storage room or they knew its contents well enough to predict my timeline." She paused. The voice was male, older, careful. "He said he worked here before me." Rafe's jaw tightened, the same, almost imperceptible movement she'd first noticed during the Klein meeting. "I know who it is," he said. "Is he dangerous?" "To you, no. To this situation." He looked back at the yard. "He's been complicated for a while." She waited. He didn't elaborate. Instead, he said, "Keep working the main reconciliation. Leave those 3 records exactly where they are in your index, documented, but not integrated. I'll handle the rest." "And if he calls again, answer it," Rafe said. "Listen, don't commit to anything. Tell me immediately after." She nodded. She went back inside. She was pulling a vendor folder from the storage room at 11:40 when she heard a car in the yard that sounded different from the usual traffic, the sound of a vehicle that cost more than anything that belonged here pulling across gravel, it had no business being on. She heard it and kept working. She heard voices Garvey's, and then someone else's, smoother with the particular cadence of a man who had spent years in rooms where he was the most important person and had let it organize his entire personality around that fact. She kept working. Denny appeared in the storage room doorway at 11:53. His face was doing something complicated. "There's a man asking for you," he said. "What's his name?" she said, though she already knew. "Preston Vale." She closed the folder she was holding, set it on the shelf in exactly the right position, picked up her legal pad, walked out. Son. Preston Vale was standing in the middle of the main office looking like a man who had dressed for a different meeting and arrived in the wrong building. He was in a charcoal suit, not overdressed by his standards, but absurdly overdressed for a scrapyard, and he was holding a leather briefcase that matched Klein's portfolio in the way that expensive things match each other across different owners. He was 51, lean, with the kind of posture that comes from years of being told he was the most capable person in any room and believing it. He saw Tessa, and his face did the things she knew, the things she'd spent years learning to read before she made the mistake of trusting it. A controlled warmth, a studied reasonableness, the expression of a man performing patience for an audience. The audience in this case was Garvey, who was standing near the door with his arms crossed, and the flat assessment of someone watching a vehicle he's not sure is going to pass inspection. "Tessa," Preston said, warm, almost fond. "I've been looking for you." "I know," she said. "You've been texting me." "I was worried." He looked around the office, the organized files, the cleared workspace. Tessa, standing with a legal pad, and something moved through his expression. Not the warm version, something faster and cooler. Recalculation. "This is where you've been." "This is where I work," she said. He looked at Garvey, at the cut on Garvey's vest. His expression managed the information without visibly reacting, which was its own kind of reaction. "I'd like to speak with my wife privately," he said. "Ex-wife," Tessa said. "And this is my workplace. You can say whatever you need to say here." Preston set his briefcase on the edge of her desk, an ownership gesture claiming space, and clicked it open. He pulled out a set of documents with the practiced efficiency of a man who had rehearsed the move. He set them on the desk and turned them toward her. "I had my attorney finalize the dependency claim," he said. "These are the supporting documents. The court date is in 11 days. If you sign the acknowledgement now, we can resolve this without a hearing. You come home, the motion is withdrawn, and everything goes back to the way it was." Tessa looked at the documents. She didn't touch them. She looked at them the way she looked at records, reading the structure, first the contents second. "The dependency claim was answered 4 days ago," she said. "Caroline Marsh filed the response through the Franklin County Court. If your attorney didn't notify you, he's behind." Preston's controlled expression held. "I'm aware of the response. It doesn't change the underlying. The response documents my legal separation through 3 independent paper trails and demonstrates that no verbal financial arrangement existed because no financial overlap has existed since February." She kept her voice even, factual. "Your motion has no foundation. The court will dismiss it." Preston smiled, the warm version again. "Courts take time, Tessa. In the meantime, I'm employed," she said. "I have a documented address, a bank account, and a work record that started 6 days ago. The dependency narrative doesn't hold against that, and you know it." He looked at her for a moment. The warm expression faded by a very specific degree, not gone, but thinned. She'd seen that thinning before. It happened when the soft tools stopped working and he started calculating which harder ones to reach for. "I also have these," he said. He pulled a second set of documents from the briefcase. "Your signature on a joint investment account that we opened in 2021. The account is still active. Under the terms of the investment agreement, you remain a co-obligor on a liability that comes due in March. If you're not in communication with me before that date, I'll have no choice but to name you in the default filing." Tessa looked at the documents. The account. She'd forgotten the account, or not forgotten, suppressed, because looking at it meant looking at a period of the marriage when she'd still believed that signing things Preston put in front of her was part of being a functioning partner, rather than being systematically bound. She looked at the account number, the terms, the liability figure. $87,000. Her hands wanted to do the thing they did. She held them still. I need to review those documents, she said. Of course, Preston said, warm. Again, patient, winning. Take all the time you need. He left the documents on the desk and picked up his briefcase. I'll be at the Meridian Hotel through Sunday. You have my number. He looked around the office once more, and this time the look was different. Not recalculating, deciding. Nice work you've done here, he said with the specific condescension of a man who recognizes competence in others as a resource he intends to reclaim. He walked out. Garvey didn't move from the doorway until the car sound was completely gone. Then he said, "That's the ex-husband." "Yes," Tessa said. "He seems like someone who's used to winning arguments before they start." "He is," she said. "He's very good at it." She picked up the investment documents. She read them. She read them a second time. Then she put them down and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk and her eyes closed, running through what she knew. The account was real. The liability was real. The terms were what they were. Preston had not invented this. He was too careful to invent things that could be fact-checked. He had constructed this, probably 2 years ago, probably in the period when she was still trusting the version of him he performed at dinner parties and real estate closings. He had built a legal obligation into the architecture of their marriage, the way you build load-bearing walls, not obviously, but structurally, so that removing yourself from the building risks the whole thing coming down on you. She picked up her phone and called Caroline Marsh. Caroline answered on the second ring. Tessa described the account, read the terms, quoted the liability figure. Caroline was quiet for 4 seconds. In Caroline's economy of silence, 4 seconds was a long time. "He's had this ready," Caroline said. "Since before I left," Tessa said. "He knew you'd leave eventually." "He always prepared for contingencies," Tessa said. It was something he said he admired about himself. "How much time do we have before March?" 4 months. "We can work with 4 months," Carolyn said, but she said it in the tone of someone who means we can work with 4 months if nothing else goes wrong, which was a very different thing. When she hung up, Rafe was in the doorway. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there. Long enough, she thought. His face told her nothing except that he'd heard enough to have an opinion. "The account," she said. "I heard. It's real. He constructed it to be a leash he could use when I ran." "Is it going to hold you?" She looked at the documents on her desk. $87,000 and 4 months, and a man who was currently staying at the Meridian Hotel and thought he had just reestablished the terms of a game he'd been winning for years. "Not if I can document that I signed under false representation," she said. "If I can show that the account was presented to me as a standard investment vehicle, when it actually contained co-obligor terms I wasn't informed of, that's a material misrepresentation. It doesn't eliminate the liability, but it gives Caroline grounds to move for judicial review of the terms." "Can you prove the misrepresentation?" "I need to find my copy of the original disclosure document from 2021, Tessa said. "The one he had me sign. I'd bet everything I have that the co-obligor language is not clearly disclosed in the version I was given." "Where is it?" "Probably in a storage unit in Columbus. I kept copies of everything." She stopped. "Everything I knew to keep copies of." Rafe was quiet. Then he said, "You need to go to Columbus." "I need to be here," she said. "The reconciliation isn't finished." "Denny can hold a reconciliation for 2 days. She looked at him. "You're telling me to go?" "I'm telling you the paperwork war he's fighting needs to be fought on the ground it's filed on," Rafe said. "You taught me that 3 days ago with Klein." She held his gaze for a long moment. He was right. She knew he was right. The records she needed were in Columbus, and Preston was in a hotel 2 miles away. And every day she stayed without moving in the co-obligor documentation was a day he spent preparing for the next move. "I'll need a day and a half," she said. "Take 2. I'll be back Thursday." Rafe nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket. She expected the wallet. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and put it on her desk. She opened it. A name and a Columbus address. "Garvey's brother runs a moving company there," Rafe said. "He owes me a favor. If you need help getting into a storage unit quickly and without conversation, call that number." She looked at the paper, then at Rafe. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "Not suspicious. genuinely asking the question she'd been not asking for a week because she hadn't wanted to disturb whatever balance was allowing this to work. Rafe looked at her for a moment. Because you walked in here with $38 and a cracked phone and you didn't ask for charity. You asked for work. He paused. People who ask for work deserve to keep it. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. She started shutting down her workstation. Files in order, legal pad closed. The Kelvin folder still in her bag, separate, waiting. At the door, she stopped. Rafe, the person who called me, the one who knew about the Kelvin contract. Yeah. He knew Preston was coming, didn't he? It wasn't a question. She'd been running the timing since the call, the warning about the buffer, the careful voice, the deliberate distance. Someone had seen Preston's approach and tried to scramble her focus before he arrived. Rafe looked at her steadily. Deal with Columbus, he said. I'll deal with that. She walked out into the yard. The sun was high and the metal was warm, and everywhere around her men were working with the specific focused energy of people who understood that the work didn't stop because the situation got complicated. Preston was 2 miles away in a hotel room, reviewing his documents, believing he had just reestablished control. He had not reestablished control. He had just shown her exactly which weapon he was holding. And she knew exactly where the counter documentation was. She pulled out her phone and booked the earliest bus to Columbus. The bus to Columbus left at 6:10 in the morning and arrived 4 hours later. And Tessa spent most of that ride with her legal pad open and her pen moving, writing out everything she remembered about the investment account the day Preston had presented it, what he'd said about it, the exact language he'd used, which was careful and general and deliberately unspecific about terms that would have alarmed her if she'd understood what she was reading. She hadn't understood. That was the truth she'd spent a long time making peace with. She was not stupid. She was not naive in the ordinary sense. But Preston was very good at what he did, and what he did was construct situations where the information you needed to protect yourself was never quite available at the moment you needed it. He presented documents in motion at dinner, between other conversations, after a long day when her attention was already thin. He answered questions with adjacent answers that felt complete but weren't. He had a talent for making the signing of things feel like a formality that only a suspicious or difficult person would slow down. She had not wanted to be a suspicious or difficult person. That was the thing she'd had to grieve hardest, not the marriage. The version of herself that had worked so hard not to be difficult that she'd signed away protections she didn't know she had. She wrote all of it down. The context, the sequence, the specific things he'd said versus what the document actually contained. Carolyn needed this, not just the document, but the narrative around the document, because misrepresentation wasn't only in the text. It was in the conditions under which the text was presented. She arrived in Columbus at 10:20. Garvey's brother was waiting outside the bus station in a truck that smelled like packing blankets and motor oil. His name was Dennis, not Denny, he said immediately, as though he'd been making that distinction his whole life. And he shook her hand once firmly and didn't ask any questions, which was exactly what Rafe had promised. They drove to the storage facility on the east side. Tessa had the unit number and the combination from memory. She'd chosen a facility Preston didn't know about, paid a year in advance in cash the month before she left, which was the single most premeditated thing she'd ever done, and which she'd told herself at the time was just being careful without fully admitting that she was already planning to run. The unit was exactly as she'd left it. She went straight to the filing box marked Financial, 2019 to 2022, found the accordion folder, pulled it open. The original disclosure document was there. She pulled it out and read the relevant section and felt something cold and clear move through her, the way clarity sometimes feels like cold water, not comfortable but clean. The co-obligor language was on page 7 of a 12-page disclosure document that Preston had handed her with the signature line already bookmarked on page 11. He had described it as a standard investment vehicle disclosure routine, just signatures needed. They'd read through it together sometime when they had a proper evening to sit down. They had never had that evening. She photographed every page with her phone. Then she photographed the signature page separately with the date, and then she photographed the bookmark crease on page 11, physical evidence of where the document had been presented to her as needing her attention, with page 7 left unmarked and unremarked. Got what you need, Dennis said from behind her. Yes, she said. Rafe said to ask if you need anything moved. She looked at the unit. Everything she'd put here still held her real documents, her backup records, the objects she'd chosen to save. She hadn't been able to think past survival when she'd packed it, but looking at it now, she understood she was past survival. She was in a different stage, and this unit was no longer a hiding place. It was a resource. Not today, she said, but I'll be back. Dennis drove her to Caroline Marsh's office, which she hadn't asked him to do. He just went there. She understood that Rafe had given him instructions that were more detailed than he'd let on, and she found she didn't mind. There was a difference between being managed and being supported, and she was starting to be able to feel it clearly. Caroline looked at the photographs on Tessa's phone for a long time. Page 7, she said, unmarked, no tab, no highlight, no reference in his verbal description of the document. And he presented it bookmarked to page 11. At dinner on a weeknight after I'd told him I was exhausted, he said it was just signatures. Caroline set the phone down. This is misrepresentation, not airtight. He'll argue you had a duty to read the full document, but the combination of the bookmark evidence, your account of the circumstances, and the fact that the co-obligor terms are buried without any corresponding disclosure summary creates a strong argument for judicial review. Can we move before the March date? We file for review this week. We request a temporary stay of the co-obligor obligation pending the review. That freezes his leverage until a judge evaluates it. Carolyn paused. He'll fight the stay. Let him fight it, Tessa said. He's the one who put the language on page 7. Carolyn looked at her for a moment. You've changed in 10 days, she said. I've been working, Tessa said. They spent 90 minutes preparing the filing. Tessa signed what needed signing initialed, were indicated, and left Caroline's office at 2:15 with a copy of the filing receipt and the particular lightness that comes not from a problem being solved, but from a problem being correctly engaged. She called Ray from the sidewalk. He picked up on the second ring. How'd it go? We found the misrepresentation. Caroline is filing for review and a temporary stay today. A beat of silence. Good. How are things there? Another pause. Slightly longer. Preston came back this morning. Tessa stopped walking. What did he do? Came to the gate, said he wanted to speak with you. Garvey told him you weren't here. He said he'd wait. Is he still there? No, he left after about an hour. A pause. He had someone with him, a man who sat in the car and didn't get out. Lawyer, Tessa said. Maybe not a lawyer. She understood what he meant by that. Rafe? We're fine, he said, not dismissively, just factually. Come back when you're done. There's something here you need to see. He hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she called the bus station and booked the 6 o'clock back. She arrived at Iron Meridian at 10:40 that night. The yard was mostly quiet at that hour, but not dark floodlights on the perimeter. One light in the office, the sound of someone moving in the far end of the lot. Rafe was in the office, so was Vic. So was a man she didn't recognize, mid-50s, thin, with the look of someone who had once been physically imposing and had spent years since then trying to take up less space. This was the man who had called her. She knew it before anyone said a word. Rafe said, Tessa, this is Warren Coyle. He worked here until about a year ago. Warren looked at her. He had the expression of a man who had been expecting this meeting and hadn't decided yet how to conduct himself in it. I'm the one who called you, he said. I know, she said. She sat down. What else did you put where you thought it would stay hidden? Warren flinched, just slightly. The Kelvin contract wasn't hidden, it was protected. Protected from who? He looked at Rafe. Rafe gave him nothing, just the mountain expression, the total neutral attention that meant speak or don't, but don't expect me to decide for you. There was a man, Warren said, a buyer. He was moving vehicles through the yard legitimately mostly, but 3 of them had histories he didn't want on record. He asked me to route them through Kelvin instead of standard intake. He said it would protect the yard from questions about the vehicle's prior use. And you believed him, Tessa said. I had reason to, Warren said. He'd done business with us for 2 years. He was reliable. And the vehicles, I checked them. They weren't stolen. They just had a history he didn't want visible. What kind of history? Warren was quiet. Warren, Rafe said, once, quietly. They were used in a civil suit, Warren said. The buyer was a defendant. The vehicles were material evidence in the case. He'd had them transferred to avoid them being subpoenaed. The room went very still. Tessa looked at the Kelvin folder which she'd taken from her bag and set on the desk when she sat down. She looked at Rafe. "The person who filed the county complaint," she said slowly. "Was it the buyer? Or was it someone connected to the civil suit?" Rafe looked at Warren. Warren said the plaintiff in the suit hired a private investigator. The PI found out the vehicles had passed through a scrapyard. He didn't know which one. He started filing complaints against yards in the region, looking for the records. "Klein wasn't sent here specifically," Tessa said. "He was sent here as part of a sweep." "Yes," Warren said, "but you were the one who answered him." And now whoever had filed those complaints knew exactly which yard had processed those 3 vehicles, because she had defended the records so completely that she had confirmed their accuracy. She sat with that for a moment. "The plaintiff in the civil suit," she said, "are they a threat to the yard?" "Not if the yard cooperates," Warren said. "Mustn't. The buyer is the target, not the yard. If Iron Meridian can demonstrate the vehicles passed through standard intake, even modified intake, and that the yard wasn't part of the scheme to conceal them, there's no liability here. But the records as they currently exist show the Kelvin contract, not standard intake," Tessa said. "Yes, which means the current records look like concealment, even if the yard didn't know it was concealment." "Yes," Warren said again. He looked at his hands. Tessa turned to Rafe. "We need to document Warren's account. Formally. A written statement detailing exactly what he was told by whom and when. That establishes that the yard was misled, not complicit." Rafe looked at Warren. "Will you sign a statement?" Warren was quiet for a long moment. "If I sign a statement, the buyer will know." "The buyer already sent Preston Vale to your yard to destabilize your records manager," Tessa said. The room went absolutely silent. She looked at Rafe. His expression had shifted in a way she'd never seen before, not the mountain, not the recalibration. Something that moved faster and ran deeper. "Preston is connected to the buyer," she said. It wasn't a question. The connections were assembling themselves in her head the way records assembled, not invented, just revealed. That's why the call about the Kelvin contract happened the night before Preston arrived. Someone was trying to get me to protect the records before Preston came in to destabilize them. They were working at cross purposes, and they were both connected to the same thing. Vic said from the corner quietly. "The buyer's name is Gerald Foss. He's a real estate developer out of Columbus." Tessa felt the name land. Gerald Foss, she knew that name. Not from her records work, from 3 years of sitting across dinner tables from Preston's associates and listening to conversations she was supposed to be decorative during. Gerald Foss had been at their house twice. He and Preston had talked in Preston's study with the door closed. "Preston knows Gerald Foss," she said. "We know," Rafe said. "For how long have you known?" "Since yesterday," Rafe said. When Preston came back to the gate with someone in the car. Garvey ran the plate. The car was registered to a company that lists Gerald Foss as a director. She looked at her desk, at the Kelvin folder, at 31 pages of index and 3 days of reconciliation work, and a filing cabinet that now made complete sense, and a woman who had walked in here with $38 and accidentally put her hands into something that was larger and older than any of them had told her. "He didn't come here because of me," she said. The realization arrived fully formed. "He came here because of the records. He found out I was here, and he knew I'd find the Kelvin contract. He wanted to get ahead of it, use me to access the records or remove me before I could document what I'd found." "Both," Rafe said. "Probably both." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We give the plaintiff's investigator Warren's statement and a complete copy of the reconciled records. All of it, the Kelvin contract, the 3 vehicle IDs, the intake timeline. We document that the yard was misled and cooperate fully. That removes any liability from Iron Meridian and puts it exactly where it belongs." Warren looked up. "And me." "Your statement protects you too," she said. "You were deceived by a buyer with a conflict of interest. You didn't conceal evidence, you were used to conceal it without your full knowledge. If your statement is thorough and honest, you're a witness, not a defendant." Warren looked at Rafe. Rafe said, "Sign the statement, Warren." Warren nodded slowly, like a man setting down something heavy he'd been carrying too long. The next 3 days moved fast. Carolyn filed the co-obligor review motion and the stay request on Wednesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, the stay was granted temporary pending review, but granted. Preston's leverage was frozen. The plaintiff's investigator contacted Iron Meridian on Thursday evening. Tessa handled the call. She walked him through the reconciled records, Warren's statement, the Kelvin contract, and the intake timeline with the precision of someone who had built the documentation specifically to be walkable. The call lasted 40 minutes. At the end, the investigator said, "This is the most organized evidence package I've received in 8 years of this work." "The yard is compliant," Tessa said. "It was misused. There's a difference." "Yes," he said, "there is." Friday morning, Preston checked out of the Meridian Hotel. Tessa knew because Garvey had a contact there. She didn't ask who or why. That was the kind of undocumented logic she'd learned to accept. And the contact confirmed the checkout at 9:15. He didn't call her. He didn't text. She thought about why and concluded that his attorney had finally told him what Caroline's filing meant and what the co-obligor stay meant and what cooperating with a civil investigation meant when you had dinner table connections to the primary defendant. Preston was very good at reading situations, and this situation now read in a way that had nothing in it for him. She was at her desk when Rafe came in at 10:30. He set something on the desk in front of her. A key, not the storage room key, not the small key from day 3. A new one, brass with a tag that read "Office" in Denny's handwriting. "That's the master," Rafe said. She looked at it. "Permanent position," he said. "Records and intake manager. Salary, benefits as we have them. Full authority over the filing system, intake process, and compliance documentation." He paused. "Garvey wants to rebuild the lot system with you. Says you're the only person who ever understood his original logic." She looked at the key for a long moment. "The 3 records from day 1, she said. "The Kelvin contract. All of it goes into the reconciliation correctly now." "All of it," Rafe said. "Clean, accurate, fully documented." "And Warren, he signed his statement. He's done with it." She looked at the key. She thought about a motel room on Route 9 and $38 and a cracked phone and a gate she'd pushed through with her shoulder because both her hands were full. She thought about a man who had spent years building traps in the architecture of her life and believed that the right combination of legal pressure and financial leverage could pull her back from anywhere she ran. She thought about what it felt like to know your own records, to have them in order, to be able to put your hand on any document in any drawer and know exactly what it said and exactly what it meant and exactly how it connected to everything else. She picked up the key. "I'll need to order a proper filing system," she said. "The current cabinets are at capacity. We need a second unit and a cross-reference binder for each month going forward." Rafe almost smiled. "Order what you need. And I want to set up a quarterly audit process, internal. So we're never in a position where the records can be used against us because they're behind." "Do it." She put the key in her pocket. She opened her legal pad to a fresh page. She wrote the date at the top. Denny came in with coffee, good coffee. She noticed not the bad stuff from the back room and set it at her elbow without comment. Garvey appeared in the doorway at 11, clipboard in hand, with the expression of a man who had a lot of ground to cover and was ready to start. "Whenever you're ready," he said. "The lot's not going to document itself." "Give me 5 minutes," she said. She sat for those 5 minutes and drank her coffee and listened to the yard moving around her. The machinery, the men, the sound of work that didn't stop because situations got complicated, because that was the nature of a place that processed what other places discarded and found value in what everyone else had given up on. She thought about her mother's phone number, which she needed to call, her sister who didn't know where she was, Caroline Marsh, who had a review hearing in 6 weeks and needed Tessa's full deposition, the storage unit in Columbus that was full of her real life waiting to be brought forward. She thought about Preston Vale in a car on a highway moving away from here, doing the math on a situation that had stopped adding up in his favor, rearranging his strategy around the absence of a woman who had turned out to be harder to leverage than he'd planned. She did not feel sorry for him. She did not feel angry at him either. Not anymore, not in the hot, burning way she had in the early months when everything was still raw and running was the only strategy that made sense. What she felt now was something quieter and more durable. The feeling of having stood in the room while someone tried to use her own history as a weapon against her and having answered every item on the list. She put down her coffee cup. She picked up her pen. She stood up. "Ready?" she called to Garvey. She walked out into the yard, legal pad in hand, into the noise and the work and the bright ordinary light of a morning that was hers, not borrowed, not conditional, not surviving on someone else's tolerance. She had walked through that gate with $38 and nowhere left to run, and she had not run. She had stayed, she had worked. She had read the system and rebuilt it and defended it and understood it down to its bones, and now the system was hers to keep. Tessa Rowland was not a woman running from a life anymore. She was a woman who had built a new one in the one place nobody expected, on the only foundation that had never failed her, the precise, irrefutable, indelible truth of a record kept right.